Well, in order to talk about money, the best guest is Lynn Reaser. As we have seen this morning, she's the director of the Fermanian Institute in the Point Loma Nazarene University in the United States, in San Diego. And she has been the person that has created the Da Vinci Index that tries to fix the relation between economics and biomimetics. So thank you very much for being in Barcelona.
And buona tarda. We, in 2010, 3 years ago, did the first study in terms of looking at the economic and the financial impact of what biomimicry, biomimetics, bioinspiration, there are, of course, a number of different terms, would mean in another 15 or so years. Just in the last few months, we have now updated that study to look forward out to 2030 to see what the field has been doing in the past 3 years, also since 2000, and then how we see it progressing through the year 2030. So let me share with you this afternoon some of the highlights of those findings. First of all, some of the trends since 2000 we've seen. 3 years ago, we did a case study of 10 companies, how those companies have progressed, the industry penetrations and the economic projections that we see over the next 20 years or so, the investment implications, and then some conclusions on what perhaps the next steps should be. As Ignacio has suggested, we have developed what we call the Da Vinci Index, which monitors the progress of biomimetics. We measure number of patent filings, scholarly articles, research grants, both in terms of numbers and the dollar value. And what you see here is that since 2000, this index has increased very significantly, a 5.5-fold gain. Last year, for example, there were some 2,000 scholarly articles published worldwide. We plan on actually producing an international version of the Da Vinci Index early next year, so we hope to actually then bring that dimension to measuring the progress in this field. Here you can see what's going on the research side. This is based on those number of scholarly articles published in 2012. And what you see is the United States and China are at the lead, but Spain now is in the top 10 in terms of research articles that are being published in this field. And in terms of the major topics, clearly the most prevalent items of interest now are taking place in chemistry, in materials, engineering. Those are really the top 3 areas where we see bioinspiration really starting to affect much of the research that is taking place. In terms of the global spread of bioinspiration, we are seeing a lot of activity. A lot of circles of influence here. The hub that's being formed right here in Barcelona is really at the lead of those kinds of circles of influence. We have also various networks developing. We have all kinds of areas where we have incubators taking place. And so there are various circles of activity that are really developing, whether they be in Asia, Montreal, in San Diego, in California, where I'm from, San Francisco, a lot of different areas. Northern Europe also very active in this field. A lot of websites being developed, a lot of conferences. We also have quite a bit of media exposure, and it's now also moved beyond just the scientific journals into the popular press. And finally, also more degrees and academic majors that are taking place. So a lot of activity taking place at the research, academic, government levels. Now moving on to the business side, what's happening at the company level with regard to biomimetics? As I indicated, 3 years ago, we took 10 companies and then traced what had happened to them in the past 3 years. And these were a number of different types of products that were developed, everything from fluid mixers to surface coatings, floor tiles, display panels. And I will tell you that the results were really quite varied. Most of them were successes, but two of the ventures that we looked at, despite very promising starts, actually failed and were subsequently absorbed into other companies. And so what were some of the lessons that we have learned in interviewing these various companies, both the successes and the failures? First of all, Bioinspiration has tremendous value. Clearly, companies are intrigued by the link to nature. Bioinspiration, Biomimetics sometimes helps to explain the product. Companies whose CEO really wants to be sustainable, and I think that Europe is quite a bit ahead of the United States in really embracing the whole environmental sustainable thesis. Those ventures really are attracted to biomimetics. But ultimately what we heard as we looked at these companies is that a product or a service needs to stand on its own 2 feet. It can't just rely on the link to nature. It's got to be competitive in the marketplace. It's got to prove to the customer that it is lower cost as alternatives, brings greater efficiency, or opens up new markets. And in fact, all of these companies said they face huge hurdles in terms of market resistance. Customers come in with their supply chains that have been ingrained over many years. They have all their clients that they've dealt with, and they don't like change. So you have to convince them that there is another way, a better way of doing things. And there are also capital constraints. So we're seeing on one side still a lot of government funding coming in. And as you heard the gentleman saying from London, that it is all about money. Again, it's when you start a business, it of course is very hard to get capital. Even if you're part of a bigger company, it's hard to get the attention of the CFO to actually get funding for your bio-inspired products, especially if they don't get it. And as I said this morning, 99.9% of the public does not know what bioinspiration or biomimetics is. They've never heard of it, they don't get it, and you really have to train and educate them. And finally, as we looked at these companies, what came to us time and time again was that you can have a great idea, a great scientist, a great concept, but to implement it, to take it to the business side, you've got to have basic management skills. Operations, finance, marketing, they have to be in place. And so those are kind of the constraints that are, I think, holding back the field from moving to the scientific great idea concept to actually making it a viable part of our economy. Because right now, it's basically small, privately owned companies, handfuls of them, not part of the mainstream way that corporations are thinking of doing business. Now, in terms of where we could be, I continue to believe there is huge potential for biomimetics transforming huge slices of our economy. And so as we now look forward to 2030, I think that you could be changing the way things are being done, particularly in materials, architecture, engineering, transportation equipment, but also, as we heard this morning, mining and a lot of these other fields. So huge potential there. And indeed, there are some very exciting emerging trends. And Nasi and I were talking at lunch. One of the most exciting, and I think real ways to break through to the mainstream would be through 3D printing, because that is the emerging technology, and that could be the aha for the 21st century, because there's a very close connection with biomimetics, because with 3D printing, additive manufacturing, you can take some of the materials that are inspired by nature, much more flexible materials, and use them in that process. You can also simulate the designs that we find in nature, as opposed to the Euclidean, the straight line, hard edges of geometry that are typically in most manufacturing processes. And you can have the customization we were talking about this morning, that no tree is alike in nature, but in most manufacturing, you're on an assembly line, but in 3D printing you can be very different. So I think this could be a real breakthrough. But we're seeing now robotics, soft robotics, which you actually have robots that are simulating nature as opposed to the mechanical wheels and other structures that are now used. Data storage with DNA and self-healing materials, such as you find in nature, that would, for instance, allow you to seal oil pipe leaks or heal or seal airplane fuselages or bodies. So a lot of potential uses that are just beginning to emerge. And so as we looked at our economic projections, they are really, I think, still quite optimistic when we look forward to 2030. In the United States, we're looking to see an impact of about $425 billion in terms of total output or GDP, and then another $65 billion that you would basically save through less pollution, less resource depletion. Globally, what do the numbers look like? Well, by 2030, we could see $1.6 trillion of global output impacted, and about $500 billion through less resource depletion and less pollution. Now, in terms of the third part of it, we talked about a lot of activity going on at the early stage scientific, less traction at the business side, but still quite a bit of activity. What's happening on the investment side? Well, unfortunately, this is where I think the real weak link is. We're not seeing much happening at the investment level yet. Huge potential. There are a lot of green investors, green investment funds, foundations, particularly here in Europe, that really want to have a sustainable green area to invest in. What better area than biomimetics? And also, if you talk to investors, and when I was here visiting with Nancy, I just come from a Zurich conference 1.5 years ago, and what all the people from the financial world said is, wow, this is really interesting. We see biomimetics as a treasure trove of innovation. Nature is a treasure trove of innovation. We don't care that it's from nature. We really don't. We could care less. But we're very interested because there's this huge bonanza of solutions and innovation that are right there if we can capture it. And also there are very high rates of return that we have seen from the examples that we, for instance, have looked at. But what are the constraints? Well, one, there's just a lack of knowledge. Most of the companies that have been using biomimetics are small, privately held. They're not going to give you numbers on sales. They're not going to give you numbers on profits. Big companies that are public, they're not going to break out those sales numbers for their divisions that are doing this area. So there's no data out there. The investment people say, we need numbers, and we go back to them and say, we don't have numbers. And so that's a problem. There are no investment vehicles. If you want to call your broker and say, I want to invest in biomimetics, first of all, the broker might say, will probably say, what is biomimetics? Can you tell me? Say, okay, yeah, all right, I get it now. All right, you want to invest in it. Well, I'm sorry, but there's no mutual fund. There's no exchange-traded fund. I don't even know if there's any stock around, so call me back next year. I might have something for you. So that's a problem. As I said, no hard data. And what we really would need, and we were talking about this as lunch, what we need in biomimetics to really give it traction is a major home run. An iPhone, an iPad. So maybe we need a biophone or a biopad. A major home run that says, wow, this is where the action is. Maybe 3D printing it, is it? I was talking to Janine Benius, who's really the founder of a lot of this. She said maybe it's the next cool app. It might be an application. But it would be nice if we had a major home run, and it may come from one of you folks right here, but that would be great. That would really, get the 99.9% of the investment and the general mainstream population to know that this field is really vibrant and alive. So, in conclusions, what do we need to do to move to the next step, to realize the huge potential in this field? And I do believe it is a huge potential. When I started this work, I really viewed biomimetics as being a bridge between the environmental and business. All my life, and probably yours as well, raised as basically there's the environmentalists over here and the business people over here, and the two shall never meet. They will be fighting for the rest of their lives. The environmentalists think the business people are out to destroy the planet, and the business people think the environmentalists are sort of crazy. I think biomimetics allows you to bring these two together because nature's solutions are by instinct, inherent, they're self-sustaining, they're efficient. Nature is a closed system, and they also allow businesses to reduce costs, to improve efficiency, and also be very sustainable. So it's a win-win solution. And it's also, as I say, this treasure trove of innovation. But the next steps, I think, first of all, policymakers need to collaborate, cooperate. This is, we're starting to see in this conference, I think Ignacia said it very well this morning, we need a roadmap. And that's one thing the 3D printing people have already done. They've got together all their leaders and people that are involved, and they said, what do we need to do to take this field to the next step? And they came up with a roadmap to figure the path out. We have not yet really done this globally for bioinspiration. We do need to foster further academic research. And I will tell you, at least in the United States, that's getting harder because the government funding is now sort of dwindling. And I think you're going to see, more budget pressures around the world. We need to do a better job of linking scientists with companies. Right now, companies pretty much, they have their research R&D departments. They have gone up through the ranks, through school, through training, doing it the way that they were trained to do it, and they don't get the bioinspiration thing. They just don't get it. They're still doing it the old way. Dennis is, these people are exceptions, but most of them, they sort of have a silo mentality. A biologist in this group? I don't think so. They just don't fit in the engineering department at all. So you have this, the engineers are here, the designers are here, and the two shall never meet. And we need incubators to, again, link the scientists with the solutions, with the companies looking for the answers. And then we need mentors to help the people with the great ideas get to the first step of business. And then if the business is successful, help them get to the next stage of development where they're having to expand. So the new entrants, I think, they basically, as we look at new entrants, what do they need to do? They need to prove their value. They need to expect resistance from customers. And they need that expertise in finance, operations, and marketing. And then finally, what needs to be done on the part of investors and financial firms? There's greater awareness of those profit possibilities, the need to read past the green label to really see the economics cost benefits, looking at opportunities, particularly in chemistry and material science, and then developing those ways to invest in the field. So in conclusion, I feel, again, very strongly that biomimetics can represent a true game changer in the way we think about the economy, but we need to get that change in the way of thinking in our DNA. We probably need it at the very early stage of education, but we really have an uphill battle to change the way of thinking. But if we do that, I think there are absolutely enormous opportunities that we can see in this field. So thank you very much.
So a short question. When we are talking about to making this new roadmap, do you think that we need some new skills in the sense that economical professionals would have to need some other skills in order to be more collaborative or to be more open source or to think in a more open way in order to begin to think about biomimetics? Because in some way, something that would have to make the World Biomimetic Foundation is to try to make the basis and the basics to begin to create this roadmap. No?
I think that's very much a true diagnosis of the problem, because right now biomimetics is still very much split between the environmentalists, the people who are still thinking green sustainability as their primary focus, and then the people who are saying, no, you need to have the business case, you need to have the investment case. And the two are still quite a bit apart, and they really need to break down that split and come together and say, all right, what do we need to advance the field, rather than each sort of going down their channel. And I will say, you know, the groups have, you know, there have been people who have split from one side to the other. But, you know, people like Janine Benius, who now really gets the business and investments. She's been obviously on the environmental side for many years. But I just met with her last week, and she said, you know, she's working with us and following our work, and she said, I really think you're right that we need to get the buy-in from the business side and the investment side to really move this forward. So you really need to break down these silos, and you also, within the profession, you need to break it down between, you know, the engineers and the biologists and the design people. And that's why, you know, we really think you need, for instance, at the university level, a curriculum that crosses all those fields rather than the silo mentality. And then finally, as I said, you really need to start the education process way down at the kindergarten, first grade level.
That's right. I think that cross-innovation and hybridization of this innovation is something that we have to learn. So thank you very much,
Thank you,
Lynn. And